Thank you, Honorable Chairman Miller, other members of the committee, other members of Congress who are here. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today. I'm Jim Melius. I'm an occupational health physician, currently work for the New York State Laborers Health and Safety Fund. It's a labor management fund that focuses on issues for union construction laborers in New York. It's also been mentioned, I've also currently serve as chair of the steering committee for the World Trade Center Medical Monitoring and Treatment Program. Immediately after 9/11, I became involved in working to, with our members and with our contractors to try to provide protection. We had over 2,000 members who were involved in the initial response for the initial few weeks down at the World Trade Center, some there immediately, many coming in over the next few weeks into the site, and eventually ended up with close to 4,000 members working at the site. In my testimony, I point out we tried to obtain information on the degree to which they needed to be protected. It was very difficult. The federal government was not initially sharing information, then was not. And we were actively involved in the site safety committee that Ms. Clark has already mentioned, and actively involved in working to provide our members with protective equipment, protective equipment, as well as with appropriate safety training. But it was under very difficult circumstances. Things were not well organized, and it took a great deal of effort. And I think much of that effort could not be implemented for several weeks or months into the course of the initial cleanup. For example, the safety training for members there, that was several months after the initial event before that became required for people working at the site. As has been pointed out, I mean, OSHA played, I think an important role there, and they had large numbers of people there and were working very hard. However, it was always a consultative role. There was no enforcement of standards, and therefore, as Dr. Jackson's pointed out, compliance varied quite a lot, and there was very little coordination of what different people were doing. Now that approach was also what was taken by the city of New York, which apparently was in charge of the site, but they also, in terms of health and safety, played what I would describe as a consultative role. And while that approach worked in terms of preventing major injuries, it was an extremely dangerous site, and I think it's remarkable how low the injury rate was. At the present time, we're now faced with thousands of workers who are now suffering from pulmonary disease, other health problems as a result of their exposures at the site. These problems are widespread and serious, as Dr. Landrigan has pointed out, and they cannot be solely attributed to exposures, the day of the event or the immediate few days after the event. People continue to be exposed for many months after that. The compliance with consultative requirements is not always 100%. It's not as good as when there's actual enforcement. I would also point out that the hazards at the site, the respiratory hazards, were not new. They may be unique and they may be very complicated, but when I worked at OSHA, at NIOSH over 25 years ago, actually with Dr. Landrigan, we issued an alert about the respiratory health hazards of alkaline dust, the very kind of cement dust that was present at the World Trade Center site. So it was should not have been a surprise to anybody that there was the possibility of respiratory disease from this exposure to that. And I think looking back, again, retrospectively, I think we just have to admit that we failed to provide the proper protection. It's not, as Dr. Jackson pointed out, it's not only just the use of respirators. It was a comprehensive approach to safety at the site that included enforcement. I don't think that you can protect people in those circumstances without a strong enforcement effort. There's too many groups involved. And so my recommendations for moving forward is that we need to make sure that we have the kind of incident safety management plan that Dr. Jackson's pointed out, some of the other needs for coordination and pre-planning, but we also need a very strong OSHA involvement in these incidents that includes the ability to, one, comprehensively assess hazards at the site, to enforce the appropriate standards of protection for people, and that would have a place that no work at that site should go forward without OSHA his certification that people are being appropriately protected during that work. Now we do have to recognize that there's a sort of a rescue phase that immediately occurs after an incident such as the World Trade Center. We need to prepare for that. We need the training and so forth for people to have proper equipment ahead of time so that they are properly protected. But that should be part of this overall safety planning process and enforcement of appropriate health and safety standards at the site. In the case of the World Trade Center, there was no reason that work could not have been stopped there after the rescue phase until it could have been organized and we could have had a proper safety program that could be enforced throughout that site. I'll also add that given, in follow-up to Dr. Landrigan's testimony, we also need a comprehensive medical follow-up program for people involved in these incidents. We know that, we see that in other instances, and I think we, unfortunately, we would hope that it would not need to be as extensive as we have for the World Trade Center, but it is something that I think is very appropriate and very badly needed in terms of follow-up. Thank you. I'll be glad to answer any questions.